Well, hello, or hopefully hello again. This is Sean Smith with the Learning Research Network, or the LRN, and we're doing a series here thinking about planning and designing for all individuals. Now, this is the second of two parts focused on this idea of learner variability. Now, learner variability is essential because, as this comic illustrates, that if we plan and design with one individual in mind, or if we plan and design for this idea that there's a typical or average, we are going to have ourselves, some problems, some challenges. And we look at this comic and say, of course, we don't do those types of things. And yet, with the variability that we were discussing in the first session, and we'll continue discussing now, is the reality of our Catholic schools. Our poster children of our child with Down syndrome or inclusion when we think of, a child with Down syndrome or autism when we think of inclusion is no longer the reality. In this post-COVID world, we have a lot of students with a lot of variability. And I left the last session asking, what do you do to better understand who your students are? What type of information do you collect? And you may say, well, I have a math test, or I have a reading test, or we do writing assignments, or the student's journal. And yet, there's lots of different ways to collect information about the students' learning preferences or how they perceive themselves as learners. And that's important, right? I mean, we have some learners that may be a little bit off on their reality of how they actually are as learners versus how they may perceive themselves as learners. I'm very, very organized. Well, that's a different story. Let's kind of define organized and go from there. So my question is, in terms of the type of information you collect, and by the way, we'll get to the variety of things you can do, but my question is, what not only do you collect, but then how do you take that, better understand it, and appreciate the needs to plan and design based on that variability? Now, I have a visual here of a student showing, high, low, average on a variety of different topics. Now, with that, I'll actually have in our part of our resources with this video, one that I've done with a colleague on 9 different areas that, yes, they're in respect to learning, but they also could be in respect to collaboration with us as professionals and a host of other things. So in this instance, it's simply taking the same ideas. How would you rate yourself, thinking of yourself, either from a low, average, or high in each of these 9 areas? Your creativity, your time management, your knowledge, your problem solving, oral, written communication, listening, and the list goes on. Now, think of that in many different ways. First of all, how was a learner that you're working with rate themselves? And by the way, you may change this to other categories. And by the way, you also may use like a Likert scale. And it could be smiley faces or frowny faces, depending upon how they see themselves. Or it could be 1 out of 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the poorest or lowest or whatever it may be. But that's up to you. But how are you collecting that information? Because the relevancy for your students, of course, is the better you understand the variability, the better we can design and plan accordingly, which, of course, we'll get to in the next presentation. But also, for a professional's perspective, we know one of the 4 high leverage practices, and there's 4 primary high leverage practices. One, of course, is instruction. The other is assessment. The other is social, emotional, behavioral. And the 4th or the first, however you want to count it, or the 2nd or the 3rd, is collaboration. In collaboration, we have found if we can collaborate and collaborate effectively with professionals and with family members, we know that is going to lead to better outcomes in terms of performance, learning, knowledge, and skill development for our learners, particularly those struggling and those with disabilities. Now, when I think of the collaboration that I have, I collaborate with a number of professionals. One that I've collaborated with for over a dozen years. We literally, depending upon the project we're working on, we may work 23 hours a day. You're like, Sean, that doesn't sound like too effective collaboration. Well, what I'm talking about is I am a morning person. Now, I'm a morning person since I was a paper boy. And so first thing in the morning, 5 o'clock, 5 to 9, 5 to 10 in the morning, I'm probably at my best. Now, throughout the day, I'm fine. But 7 or 8 in the evening, 9, to be able to really problem solve, write, read for comprehension, I'm limited. And yet my colleague that I work with, first thing in the morning, forget about it. But by those hours I was just mentioning, 9 or 10, she's a mother of 2, and I think she's learned it as a mother of 2. They're down, she's picking it up, and from maybe 10 to 2, she's moving at it, or 10 to 3 in the morning, she is going at it. And so if you think about it, in a 24-hour clock, we're probably doing 22, 21, maybe even 23 hours of a 24-hour day. We're working, not all together, but we're working. Now, and I'm not asking that of you, but what I'm having you consider is respect to the fact that the variability with the professionals you work with, Some may see themselves as very creative. You're opposite. Some may be very focused on time management. It's malleable. Some of you may be very good in terms of your oral communication. Others, no, or risk taking, whatever it may be. Collaborating with a professional and not appreciating their variability is going to be complex and challenging and may prevent you from collaborating and therefore prevent you from using one of the 4 high leverage practices to meet the needs of struggling learners or those with disabilities, let alone plan and design for the variability of the learners we're working with. And by the way, when we think about this, that plan and designing then leads into the instructional design that needs to follow in terms of the lessons that need to follow, in terms of the resources that we need to utilize, the materials, the way we measure, the way we assess based on their variability. We need to plan and design accordingly. We can't go with this idea that, one size fits all, because we don't have a one size fits all with our students. And again, I hope this session and the session prior really reinforces that. So let's leave you with the following. How can you get information about these learning preferences? It may be the fact that you survey or question them in a variety of ways, like the one I just shared with you. It might be the fact that you're interviewing students, or more importantly, maybe the students interview their parents or the parents interview them, and then you're listening. It's a twofer. You're listening to the student and you're listening to the parent, which could be quite neat in terms of video, and then they're putting it in your learning management system. You're watching that, and you're getting a sense of how the students perceive themselves, how the parents perceive themselves as learners, et cetera, et cetera. It could be a variety of learning style assessments, and there's a bunch out there. I'll let you look at those at your leisure. But it could also be using things like Google Forms and Kahoots, where you create your own, and of course that data is automatically displayed. And Kahoots have the students actually complete a learning preference with Kahoots, make it fun, make it an activity, but you'll also get a sense of how they see themselves. It could be the fact that when they're journaling on different things and they're writing about those, or maybe you're collecting those journaling as podcasts or whatever it may be. Finally, we have a lot of digital tools that track what our students are doing, everything from time on task, where they spend their time, where they don't spend their time. In our learning management system, we're collecting a lot of information on preferences as well that could help us. So this is the second of 2 parts to get us thinking about the variability. I hope you've watched both of these, because the next one we're going to go into is thinking then about, if we believe in the variability of our learners, then there is no typical, and so therefore the materials we use, the resources we have, the environments, the instructional strategies might prove to be barriers for some if we don't accommodate and plan for that variability. So join me on that one, and then of course we'll go on to the next one. How do we do it? How do we plan and design? Again, this is Sean Smith with the LRN, the Learning Research Network, and thanks so much for being with me.